DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome to it, people, the DSPN. Martin Devlin. We've got the full podcast available in a week or so. In the meantime, we're rolling out some interviews with some of the key people in New Zealand sport for you. Joining us for the very first time, it's a happy new year and a welcome to 2025. And to the show is Scott Weenink, the CEO of New Zealand Cricket. G'day, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
Very well. Been a hell of a summer, hasn't it? Are you pleased with what you saw in terms of the games, the crowds, and everything else that turned up over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been a clearly a palpable buzz around New Zealand as regards cricket, and I think that's sort of come off the back of that incredible India series for the Black Caps and also the White Ferns winning the World Cup. So the buzz has been extraordinary. We saw great crowds for the England Test. The Rose Bowl was well supported. And we've had really good crowds for the Sri Lanka series. So it's we're absolutely delighted with what's been happening off the field.
In terms of the amount of people that have turned up and are watching, how much of that has or is due, do you think, to the sport returning on free to air and TVNZ Plus? I mean, it just seems a gimme, doesn't it? When it's actually on and you don't have to pay for it, people seem to be able to want to watch it in their droves.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge part of it. Of course, the both the India series and the Women's World Cup were on Sky. So that obviously drove some interest, but the fact that you can just have the cricket on in the background often has been a huge contributor. I had TVNZ officials in the box at the Sri Lanka game on the weekend, and we didn't talk specific numbers, but I said how the broadcasting numbers look, and they said look, they're through the roof. So that's incredibly exciting, and certainly free to air is a huge part of that.
When does the contract come up for renegotiation again?
So we have one more season after this with TVNZ, and obviously that contract is underwritten by Spark. So we've got really the best of both worlds because we essentially have a paid broadcasting deal that is on free to air. So we'll be looking at what we do next season shortly. And starting to sort of enter into discussions with various parties around what that might look like.
When you say next season, that's actually physically next year, or does that begin at the end of this year for the summer of 25 going into 26?
So we've got this year 24-25, and then 25-26 is the last year of the existing TVNZ/Spark deal. So it's for 26-27.
Are you happy with the commentary and the presentation? It's different than it was on Sky. And there's obviously a reason behind that.
Yeah, look, that's deliberately so. What we're seeing with free to air is a whole new audience coming to watch cricket, and therefore we need to make sure the presentation and the commentary reflects that. But just by way of example, when we were on Spark only, we were probably getting maybe 150,000 people watching the game. When we're on Sky, it might be double that. With some of these white ball games in particular, we're getting well over people watching the games, and therefore that's bringing in people who aren't your traditional cricket numpties or fans. We're bringing in those, of course, as well. But it means that the commentary and the presentation needs to be slightly nuanced to reflect that, there are people watching these games that don't necessarily know cricket, they don't know the history. When it comes to the radio commentary, that's very much a kind of a crowd like me, sort of 50 plus white males tends to be. And so, again, that is geared towards that kind of audience.
And when you have it underwritten by Spark, and also obviously, you get the BCCI money coming in every year as well, does it really matter to you in terms of the balance sheet how many people are turning up and paying to watch these games? Is that just sugar on top?
Yeah, essentially the way the revenue stack works from a New Zealand cricket perspective is we have this domestic broadcasting deal, which, as you say, is currently with TVNZ/Spark. That's maybe 25% of our revenue stack. And then we have another 25% that comes from our deal with our Indian broadcast partner, which is Sony. So essentially, we've signed up a deal, and we did that last year with Sony to show all of the games from New Zealand for the next 7 years. And that is a substantial part of our revenue stack as well. And then the next major part is the ICC distributions. And that's primarily made up of broadcasting revenue that ICC gets for their events. And then on top of that, it's the advertising, sponsorship, and the gates. So the gates are only a small part of it. However, they are still absolutely critical to our revenue stack, as much as anything, to be creating atmosphere in the grounds and thereby creating interest in the broadcast, but also for fan engagement and player engagement. So they are, although from a revenue perspective, they're not as material as other parts of our revenue stack, they're still a very, very important part of it. And so, we really want to make sure we get that right in terms of attracting audiences.
It's interesting that you mentioned, a white 50-year-old man, of course, because, you're staring at one again, and times have changed and things move on, don't they? I find it very difficult still to reconcile. We choose a side for the Champions Trophy, for example, and it was announced the other day, that we juggle players who have other commitments, and that means that, they might turn up late like they did at the T20 World Cup or whatever, and our preparation is affected because of this. Lockie Ferguson is the latest one. He's playing, I think, the IPL T20, it's called, in Dubai or something like that. You're from my generation, so take your CEO's cap off for a second. How do you reconcile this with yourself, that you're actually negotiating with these players, that you want them to play for New Zealand? Playing for New Zealand is the ultimate honour in terms of cricket, and yet because of the other commitments that they choose, they then almost get to choose when they want to play.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, look, I can't know what I don't know. So unfortunately, I kind of know all the stuff behind it, which makes it such a sort of complex issue. Look, we need to be incredibly pragmatic. We need to reflect that it's a changing world, and we need to be flexible. However, there is also a bottom line in terms of requirements around commitment to New Zealand. So in other words, all of that team except for Lockie, Kane and Devon are fully contracted. So no issues. In terms of both Kane and Devon, conversations when we gave them casual playing contracts was around what do their commitments look like for New Zealand games over the coming season. And as it is, they are and have been essentially available for 90% of our matches. So there's no issue there. And that also included a requirement that they be available for at least a couple, if not all, of that tri-series leading into the World Cup. So, pretty firm commitment from those guys in terms of, what they're available for. And, Lockie is a slightly different case, but the reality is Lockie wanted a casual playing contract, similar to what Kane and Devon had. We didn't grant him that, because we didn't see that he would be playing as much as Devon and Kane. However, we did make a requirement that if he was going to play in this tournament, he had to be available for a certain amount of games. So he's shown a commitment to that. And the reality is, if he is unavailable in the event that his team makes the final, then Jacob Duffy will step in. It's challenging, Martin. But the reality is, in this new world, we have to be pragmatic, we have to be flexible, but we also have to draw, a very firm line in the sand around commitment. And look, we think we've got that right, particularly with those three players.
Does it come down to just simply, in your mind and whoever else you get to decide with, how good this guy is? Like, for example, say Trent Boult, and he's considered one of the world's greatest bowlers and on form. You look at him and think, okay, look, if he wants to play, I mean, he's an asset to the team. Is it that simple in your mind?
No. That obviously comes into it. So anyone that's not fully contracted essentially needs to be, 25% better than the next guy to even be considered. But then it also comes down to what level of commitment they are still showing to New Zealand cricket, but also, how they are as part of the team. One of the secret sources for the Black Caps and the White Ferns is they have an incredible team morale, an incredible culture, and that's what kind of potentially sets them apart from other national teams. Now, whoever comes into that environment, if they are not normally part of it, has to be added into that environment, and that is absolutely part of the discussions that the selectors have. Is what else are they bringing to the environment, and again, players, including captains and senior players, are asked about that before teams are selected.
In terms of who's selecting and the power of the selectors and the power of the coach, how much has it now, I suppose, deconstructed into that the players dictate terms? And I go back to Tim Southey, and there's an incredible comment from Gary Stead prior to that England series where he said that Tim wanted to go out this way. He decided that this was the way that he wanted to go out. And I think for a lot of us cricket fans, we find that really disturbing. That do the senior players now decide for the Black Caps when they play, and are they allowed to select themselves?
Absolutely not. That reference to Tim, I'm sure, is that in his best mind and best opportunity would be to go out in the way that he did. Gary Stead and Sam Wells as selectors have absolute power in that regard. Now, they obviously consult with a number of people outside of that group and also some of the senior players, but ultimately it is absolutely their call, and senior players do not rule the roost in that respect. And I think if you spoke to them, they'd be a little bit horrified if that was what people thought.
What influence do you have at all, if any, over those selection processes?
Well, every squad comes up to me for approval, but that's really just for me to ensure that they have followed good process. When it comes to the sort of the non-contracted players, I'm obviously consulted as to what I think is appropriate. So in other words, when we were considering non-contracted players for this Champions Trophy, I was consulted about that, so I can give an executive and board view on what we think is appropriate. Obviously, I am involved when we're doing the annual contracting, but really the main people doing the selection are Sam Wells, Gary Stead, and Brian Stronach. When it comes to the Black Caps, and obviously the White Ferns, slightly different mix.
Just take care of a little bit of housekeeping here. If you're enjoying what you're looking at and what you're listening to, people, hit that subscribe button, DSPN YouTube channel, or you can listen to the podcast, the full interview across Spotify, Google, Apple, wherever you find your favourite podcast, and all over social media too. In terms of those two great achievements last year, the White Ferns winning the T20 World Cup and the Black Caps winning the series in India. Do you rate one above the other? And if so, why? Or do you think that when you look at both of them, that it's hard to differentiate between the excellence of both achievements?
Look, we were at New Zealand Cricket just so delighted with both of those achievements. Hard to rate them. A tournament a tournament win such as that is obviously so significant for the White Ferns. But tournaments can roll your way. And that's kind of what it did. We hit form at the right time. We beat India in that first match, and then the tournament sort of opened up for us. What was so exciting about that is the White Ferns coming off such a brutal period of having played England and Australia. And a number of losses. But as it turned out, it was like they were playing the two best teams in the world. And when they came up against other teams, they sort of realized, actually, we're a pretty good side, and we can beat teams on our day. So that was that was incredibly exciting. And I think that's going to be a seminal moment in the history of women's cricket in New Zealand. It's something for us to really build upon. So we'll look back to that. On the other side, in terms of the Black Caps beating India, that's just such an extraordinary feat. It's hard to kind of compare that to anything else. It's been widely regarded across the globe as one of the biggest upsets in the history of Test cricket, which kind of sort of gives credence to it being, obviously one of the greatest, if not the greatest thing that's happened in New Zealand cricket. To go to India, we were hoping that on the back of Sri Lanka, where we hadn't performed as well as we wanted, but we'd obviously had the experience of playing in the subcontinent, that we were in good shape to do well in India. But we're all, including the players, blown away by the way that tour went and the way we performed. I was fortunate enough to be in Bangalore for the first test, and I was there on that first morning when we rolled into a 46, sitting in the BCTI box. So I was having to be very, very, very gracious around that. But that was sort of, we got to lunch and was like, wow, is this really happening?
Yeah.
And I think India kind of kept expecting us to sort of let the foot off the throttle, but right throughout that series, we won all the tough moments, and we put it to them. And so, hard to compare that to anything else, because it was just such an extraordinary effort, and a very historic one.
So again, just harking back to how old we are and how much cricket we've watched and how long we've been around the sport, especially yourself obviously playing, and I don't know whether people know or not, but you've got a very distinguished career yourself at the bat and Test cricket and where it sits. And when you look at that recent series, India, Australia, and those 5 tests, and I know that you were glued to that like I was, like everyone who loves their Test cricket, the crowds that turned up for that, I think the television ratings were the biggest ever for any series. And then a couple of weeks later, the ICC came out and they're saying, well, maybe we need a 2-tier test system here in operation, because there are series, and Scott, we've got to be realistic about this, don't we, mate? That there are series which are going to attract massive ratings, and no disrespect to these teams, but if Sri Lanka are playing Zimbabwe in a test series, they're just not going to attract those kind of numbers, that kind of global interest or anything like that. So again, you got a lot of spinning plates here, mate. I mean, and where do you sit with it, and what kind of power do you have in any kind of decision-making process about how this is going to unfold?
Yeah. So look, it wasn't the ICC, just to be clear, it wasn't the ICC that came out with that. It actually hasn't, in my time at the ICC, been discussed yet. There's always discussions about, how we ensure that Test cricket stays relevant, that white ball bilateral cricket stays relevant. But there's been no specific discussions about a 2-tier system. The reality is, as you say,
where did that story come from then? Well, it was kind of, it was certainly attributed as though it had come from the highest upper echelons of administration. Yeah, no, well, it hadn't. And certainly it hadn't been discussed at the ICC before they perhaps spoke about it. That's not to say it's not on the cards. It could well be. But my point is, absolutely there's a challenge to Test cricket to making sure that the lesser games, or with the nations that are not as popular, remains relevant and is supported. And quite how we did that, it might require a 2-test system. I don't know. It certainly needs something. Cricket is changing dramatically. We know, people such as myself could sit down and watch, and I'd probably, well, maybe not as Zimbabwe, Sri Lanka, but I'd sit down and watch most Test cricket, full 5 days. But the new fans aren't. They're interested in T20 and to a lesser extent ODI, 50-over games. So how do we make sure that Test cricket remains relevant, remains attractive, while also, growing the game with the fans who are not so interested in it? It's the biggest challenge. What you would have seen with New Zealand recently is, we now play all of our Test cricket in these smaller boutique venues so that we fill them up. They've got grass banks. So people visiting and also New Zealanders watching enjoy that atmosphere. It makes the ground look full and creates the atmosphere. Yeah.
And so, and also what we're trying to create is a sort of festival, family type atmosphere where people are coming along to the Test cricket, to actually spend time with their friends and have a few drinks. And there's a little bit of action happening in the middle, by the by. So we're trying all the different techniques to keep it attractive. But the biggest thing in cricket is competitive cricket, competitive high quality cricket. And so you need to ensure that you've got competitive games. And, a game Australia versus Zimbabwe is not going to be competitive, unfortunately. So is that going to attract interest? Is that going to attract broadcast rights? Probably not. That's just being realistic. So we do need to work out how we get the balance right of competitive Test cricket, thereby keeping the interest, while also trying to grow the game globally.
In terms of the calendar and how it unfolds over the next couple of years, again, do you have to go to the table and really fight for absolutely everything? I mean, what kind of position, what kind of power do we have, given where our team is at the moment?
Look, fortunately for us, we are well regarded. The Black Caps and the White Ferns are teams that people want to play. So that gives us a little bit of leverage. We certainly don't have the same commercial attraction that England, Australia, and India and probably South Africa do. But we definitely do have some leverage. So that enables us to have conversations around, trying to get content. To be frank, most of our content is actually locked in until, for the next 5 or 6 years. So there's not a lot that I'm able to do in terms of supplementing that. However, you do have conversations. At the last ICC, I chatted to the West Indies about potentially adding on a third test to our tour to their tour to us later this year. And they went away and worked out that they actually worked with their schedule. So we've added a third test. So we are constantly trying to find more cricket where we can. It's just such a crowded calendar that it is challenging. And that also, because you've got all these domestic T20 leagues and players have those commitments, it does make it a challenge. But it's like putting together these schedules is like a matrix on top of a matrix. It's incredibly challenging.
3D chess in front of your eyes, isn't it, mate? Yeah. All right, I've got a couple and I'll let you go. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're on holiday doing this for us, and we can tell wherever you are, the Wi-Fi is a little wonky, so very much appreciate you, mate. So in terms of the WTC, the World Test Championship, it's a real struggle to get the head around this. I mean, a guy like Ben Stokes kind of dismisses it as he did, saying, look, I find this confusing. He said, I don't understand it. We play twice as many tests as the next guy, and South Africa send a D team to New Zealand, and yet they make the final. Is it really worthwhile? Does it need a rejig? And is a better system just to do it like a normal Premier League or something where everyone plays everyone home and away in a 3-test series? Because it just seems so confusing. 2 tests here, 5 tests here. And as I say, it's out of whack where one team plays so much more than the next team, to still try and work out a table as to who the best 2 teams are that meet in the final.
Yeah, I mean, look, the format is far from perfect. However, what it has done is generate, a real interest in Test cricket. And over the last couple of months, people, if you're watching Test cricket, you're actually looking at what's happened in South Africa, what's happened in Australia, what's happened in New Zealand, what's just happened in India, to see who might come up in the top 2. So although the format is imperfect, it is at least doing its job in terms of generating interest in other Test cricket. Certainly the ideal situation would be, a situation where everyone plays each other the same amount of times. And I think that's what the ICC might like to try and get to with this 2-tier format. But at the moment, it's doing its job because, I know, and hopefully you are too, you're genuinely interested in seeing what happens in the other series because of how that might impact the Black Caps and their opportunity to get to the World Test Championship.
And finally, just in case people don't know, I mean, you and me know, and again, we're tracking back years here, that myself and a guy called Nick Mills were the first in the world to start playing music at the cricket. You were actually playing for Wellington when all of this unfolded. It's de rigueur these days, mate. Can you imagine a game of white ball cricket, or even the red ball cricket, without music being played? It just wouldn't happen, would it? But way back then, it was quite seismic in terms of the sport, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely it was. It was, so I think that same season you and Nick Mills came on is when we first started playing Cricket Max, which was
yes, that's right. Yeah,
Marty Crow's invention. I think the four stumps is probably going a little bit far, but so no, that was fantastic. But
certainly the straight hit zone was good though. I like that. I think that was excellent. That you get double for hitting it straight. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Actually, my favorite memory of you during that time was when we played Central Districts, and I may have said this to you previously. We were playing Central Districts, and Mark Greatbatch was coming out to bat, and I think you played. I think his song was something else, but anyway, you played Mission Impossible. He said, "Here's this for Mark Greatbatch coming back because it'd be impossible for him scoring any runs." Now, of course, it had the reverse effect, unfortunately, for Wellington, because I think he smashed 70 or 40 or something like that.
Yeah.
But the most memorable part of that was when he got out, is him walking straight up, and this is at the base reserve, straight up the stairs, and we could watch him walking all the way up, right up to the broadcasting box to have a chat to you. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how
With
that
a bat in his
conversation
hand.
went, but I imagine you were a little bit worried
I
with
was.
him walking up with his pads and back and things.
Oh, yeah. And he's a big boy. He's a big boy, Batch. I'll actually see him in a couple of weeks at a mate's 60th, so we've made our peace since then. Look, I appreciate you so much, mate. Thank you for being so honest. You always are. You're very forthright. You're very easy to interview and ask questions, but I know that you're on holiday and you're taking a well-deserved break, so the fact you've come on with this is excellent. Thank you very much.
No, thanks, Martin. My pleasure. Really, really pleased that people are interested enough to want to talk to us. So thanks again.
DSPN.